we need development within our planetary boundary, and we need that development to be sustainable. Okay, so that essentially was the very original idea of proposing sustainable development in the 1980s. And the very famous definition of sustainable development came from the Brundtland Report. I think most of you have heard of this. She was asked by the United Nations to assemble a group of top scientists and also politicians throughout the world to come up with a report. That report was called Our Common Future. I think most of you have heard of that. And in that was the first time we defined the so-called sustainable development. And sustainable development is a development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs, essentially. That was the very original definition. And lately people have somewhat modified this to a modified definition, and it says sustainable development meets the needs of the present while safeguarding Earth's life support system on which the welfare of current and future generation depends. Okay, so those are actually the definitions of sustainable development. And the content of the sustainable development, usually people say these are the three pillars of sustainable development. Have a environment, healthy environment, economic development, and also social equity. Okay, so those are the three pillars of the sustainability. And what are the goals for sustainable development? And United Nations recently has come up with 17 goals, sustainable development. Sort of summarizing those goals, we can come up with a more focused or simplified version. The goal of sustainable development first is to achieve thriving lives and livelihood, and sustainable food security and water security, universal clean energy, healthy and productive ecosystems. And very important thing is the governance for sustainable societies. How can a society to achieve sustainable development, we have to have new governance infrastructure. So those are the sustainability goals, and we came up with this flow chart on how to achieve sustainable development, the sustainable development pathway. Okay. And as you can see, the global change essentially is caused by human activities, and those individual activities and also collective activities and so forth, economical, political, social, and so forth. And these essentially change our environment, and these are the global change environment phenomena. For instance, ozone hole, global warming, extreme weather, biodiversity, disasters, and so forth. Food security, water resources, energy, okay, and population. So those are the phenomena, those are the things that we call global change. And people have carried out research to do observation, to do analysis, to do modeling, prediction, and also to study mitigation, adaptation, and most importantly, to try to find new technology that would help us to achieve sustainability. And then when we understood all these things, hopefully we can design policies, we can educate people, we can have international regulations and so forth, so we can change the behavior of the human activity, of human society. So this, hopefully, doing research, understanding the phenomena, such that we have a consensus to make changes. And if we do make change in the correct direction and change the global change status, then it's possible we can achieve sustainable development. So this is essentially what we think that people, our society, our civilization should try to perform in this way. And this particular idea actually did work one time at least. And this is a story of ozone hole. I think most of you are familiar with this. And ozone hole, actually the history is that there is a, in the 1950s, invention of this CFCs. And at that time it was called the miracle chemical. It was a miracle material. And then in the 70s, people started to worry about this because there were so much CFCs in our atmosphere, so all sorts of applications. And so people worried about this, and they studied the phenomenon and predicted because of the emission of the CFCs in the atmosphere, so the ozone could be depleted. So at the time, we were talking about ozone hole. And in the well, people started to do a lot of observational satellites, launched a lot of observational satellites, and also increased a lot of intensive ground-based observational efforts. And in the 1980s, 1985, they indeed found in the southern atmosphere, in the South Pole, they found ozone hole. And at the time, intensive observational and laboratory studies confirmed the role of CFC in the destruction of the ozone layer, and then the world acted quite fast, quite decisively. So there was this Montreal Protocol. It was signed by all the countries in 1987 to ban CFC. Okay? And the consequence is that it actually worked. Okay? And these are data from the South Pole Station. And as you can see, in the 60s, ozone concentration in the atmosphere started to decrease from about 350 ppm to sometimes to 100, a huge change. And it continued for many years until after the Montreal Protocol, in the 1990s, 2000, it started to level off, and actually ozone started to come back. Okay. So that was a quite successful story, and why it worked. And people kind of summarize this thing. First of all, the basic research combined with intensive observational and laboratory studies confirmed that indeed CFC was the cause of the destruction of the ozone layer. And this is even more important factor, that is, the substitute alternative has been found by the industry, and substitute for CFC was already there. So it was really no economic disaster if you ban CFC. So, and then there was international consensus. So it worked. Okay. Now, coming back to our current problem of climate change, it's a different story. Climate change, we know, is real. Global warming, this is a temperature. You can see the annual change, or you average them, and since the 1980s, 1970s, 80s start to increase. Right? So we already knew about this, and many indicators of a warming world, for instance, the temperature and the decrease of the sea ice and the decrease of snow cover and so forth. And these are all observational data. So we know there is indeed global warming. That's a fact. Okay, and we also almost now people are saying 99% sure this was caused by the increase of the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. And indeed, that's the change of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. And very important thing is, if you look back, the historical data, the CO2, this is from the ice core South Pole, CO2 in the atmosphere changes, but it has never increased beyond 280 ppm throughout this historical more than many years. Here also the 400,000 actually extended now to almost 1 million years. It's like this. It changes, but never exceed 280. But in the past 200 years or so, past 100 years or so, we actually has this, what we have already seen, this hockey stick increase, and now it's more than 400. So we actually are, for CO2 emission, way over the boundary. Okay. And then there were these activities throughout the world. As you know, in 1992 we had this Earth Summit in Rio, and in 1997 people started to talk about Kyoto Protocol, the way that they would like to really see the hope to do the same thing as Montreal Protocol didn't. And then in 2002, this Rio plus 10 in South Africa, they had a meeting, and then 2012 they have Rio plus 20 in Brazil, And then every year we had this conference of parties talking about this, and this coming December, this very, very important COP21 in Paris. They have already talked so many times, but nothing really has happened. Okay, and the problems with this climate change thing, actually, if you kind of summarize the problems, is no truly viable alternative energy to replace fossil fuel has been found. Okay, so that's so people still keep using burning fossil fuel. Okay, so that's one of the things. We have not found an alternative, and there's of course impact on global economy, and this is very important, and this is one of the most sticky points for negotiation, is unevenly there's a problem. This whole global warming problem is caused by unevenly caused by different countries and social groups, essentially rich countries, Western countries, while wealth benefits from burning fossil oil and fuel and so forth. These benefits are unevenly distributed socially and geographically. So that's one of the very sticky points in the discussion. And there are still some doubts about scientific, the science of climate models. Of course, this is fewer and fewer scientists are in this group, but there are still some doubts. And so that is one of the reasons the climate change problem, using that feedback loop model that we mentioned, which was successful in the ozone hole problem, didn't really work so far for the climate change thing because of these issues. And so people came up with the new program.